I have been helping deliver newspapers since my dad started as a carrier when I was 6. Eventually, my dad was given his own distribution center, so when I turned 16 and got my license, I started doing them on my own. Most of the people in the depot have been there for years. They've watched me grow up, and I consider many of them an extended part of my family. We spent every holiday together. The newspaper never had a day off. Countless birthdays. But there was one guy who always gave me the major creeps. I was about 14 when he started, I think. I used to hang out in the back office with some of my other friends as the years went on, and he always hung out back there because he was also friends with these people. At least that's what I thought. One of them recently told me they only tolerated him. I never spoke to him because something just felt really off about the guy, but nothing happened until last year. I moved home following my graduation from college. I was already having a hard time readjusting because I no longer had any friends in the area and I was missing my college town. Creepy guy that I'll just call B started hanging around me a lot. He had a weird man crush on my dad too, always buying him extra gifts for birthdays and holidays, sucking up majorly. I did my usual nice greeting, keep to myself stuff. But then he started buying me gifts for no reason. My mom told me to just keep them because it was all stuff I liked. Marvel and cat-themed things. That was probably my first mistake. He started acting like we were BFFs and coming out to find me while I was sitting in my car and talking about how I deserve so much more than being trapped here at the depot and that he will do whatever it takes to get me out of here because he really cared about me and I deserve so much more. I never really acknowledged it because I thought it was really weird, and I thought if I just kind of nodded quickly he'd go away. This went on for weeks. Then he started texting me, telling me to sleep well after work and just being generally really creepy. I should probably mention I was 22 at the time and this guy is well into his 40s. I started avoiding him and he kept leaving things on my bench. I came in one day and there were cat posters taped along the back of my bench. I kept taking them down, but they'd be back up the next day. When I started avoiding him, he made a Facebook group chat with me and my dad complaining about every little thing and just being a major jerk. He made a really rude remark about my friend who was visiting from Germany, so I blocked him on Facebook because I wasn't going to deal with it anymore. B made a new Facebook and remade the group chat just to keep doing it. I went away for a while on a vacation to visit my childhood friend in Washington, and when I got back, he was calling me by my full name, which I absolutely hate. I was tired and jet lagged, so I went off on him, and he whipped around and blew up 3 times worse, telling me I was all these terrible names, and I thought I was so perfect because I was the boss's daughter, and there was no one there as perfect as him. My jet-lagged brain broke down after he walked away. I'm glad I held on till he left, but I stormed out to my car and told all my guy friends to keep him as far away from me as possible because I was so fed up. He started texting my brothers, asking if they were on his side and if they had his back over mine. My roommate, who was a guy, started getting threatening texts from him about wanting to fight over me. Everything was spiraling out of control. My dad made us sit down at the local Denny's one morning to work everything out because he was so sick of B blowing up his phone. When my dad was there, things were fine. B said he wasn't mad at me, but I was just the catalyst the day of the fight and whatever. My dad left to pay the bill and suddenly B's attitude changed. I was in the wrong and treated him terribly, and all he ever did was love me and I treated him so poorly. He kept trying to hold my hands over the table, telling me he loved me over and over. I put on a polite show because I just wanted this to end and thought if I was nice about it, things would be different. Apparently my answer to everything is be nice and it'll go away. He walked me to my car after the conversation at Denny's and asked if I noticed anything different. I told him no and he got agitated. Apparently he spent a lot of money on Captain America clothing, everything from a hat to shoes. I told him I didn't notice clothing like ever, and B got increasingly angry, telling me he did it to feel better about himself and impress me. Cap is my favorite superhero. I didn't even know he knew that. He had left the depot for a while, and when he asked to come back, I told my dad's manager I knew we were desperate, and I would be okay if I didn't have to talk to him. I wore headphones every day, my music full blast so I couldn't hear anything over them. He kept coming to my bench and would stand there waiting for me to acknowledge him, and he'd storm off angry when I didn't. He would glare at me if I ever talked to any other carrier, even though I'd been friends with many of them for years. My tipping point was something I found out after the fact. My guy roommate had gone to the grocery store late one Sunday. When he was walking to his car, he noticed some guy watching him. The guy watched him as he loaded the car and smoked a cigarette, and that's when my roommate realized it was B. My roommate got in his car and started driving home, and he noticed B was following him. He tried taking several wrong turns, and every time B followed. My roommate called his friend and said he was coming over, and when he said so, to open the garage to make it look like he lived there. When my roommate met his friend in the house, he told him everything, and they watched him drive by the house 8 times before leaving. No one called the police. I feel like that was the only thing that justified calling the police, because the harassment and stuff couldn't justify police action. I knew that from years of watching crime shows, and I was angry when I found out that no one called. I told my dad I wanted him gone. I couldn't take it anymore. Texts are easy to avoid, but now he was stalking us to try and figure out where I lived, since I wasn't living at home but renting a house with my brother and our friend. I spent months watching over my shoulder whenever I went to the store, worried he'd follow me home. After, he started going to my parents' house a lot because he knew where they lived, like he was waiting for me to be there one day. No one was taking this seriously. The gifts continued, and my mom kept telling me it was free stuff and to just keep it. But the gifts always came after something bad, and it was feeling oddly like an abusive relationship. Oh no, you're angry? Here's a gift to make you forget and like me again. My mom felt that way till her birthday, and a giant bouquet of roses and a teddy bear appeared at her job from B. We didn't even know he knew where she worked. After that, he started cornering me in the parking lot. I told him he'd been told to stay away from me, and I'd appreciate it if he listened. "Look," he said, "I'm sorry I took you for granted. I never should have done that. Are we okay now?" I was floored. I told him if he thought that's why I was avoiding him, he was more insane than I thought. After that, he was done at the depot, and I didn't see him for a while. A couple times I definitely saw him driving around on my route, but I couldn't prove it to a cop if I called it in. The last time I saw him, I was at my second job. I worked in a music store at a local mall. I was messing around with my coworkers when I turned around and saw him watching me from our hip-hop section. My stomach dropped. I almost collapsed and I started panicking. I ran him back and told my coworkers. They agreed if he asked, they didn't know who I was, and I could stay in the back till he left. I was a manager, but I didn't think I could actually kick him out because he was just watching me. My coworkers said he was there for almost 2 hours just wandering around. Never bought anything. It was like he was trying to wait me out, figuring I had to go back out front eventually. He texts my dad now and then, trying to get his job back and fix things. My mom told him if he ever came near us again, she'd call the cops. When my dad wouldn't take him back, he started showing up at my uncle's depot and then started a group chat with him and my dad, saying they needed to sit down and talk. I was with my dad when my uncle called him about it. My dad called everything a misunderstanding. I said I didn't classify stalking as a misunderstanding. That day he came to my other job, I decided I was moving back to my college town 3 hours away. Home no longer felt like home. I didn't feel safe going anywhere. I still worry one day he's just going to show up in my new city. I transferred to the music store there. I had worked with these people my senior year of college, and they have looked out for me even after I moved. They all know the story, and I know they would all fight for me if it came down to it, so I feel safe, but I still panic when we walk to our cars after dark and have to check the parking lot to make sure he isn't there. It's been almost a year, and all I can say is I hope I never see him again. Right after I dropped out of high school and moved out of my parents' house, I needed work real bad. I'd have done pretty much anything for rent money about that time in my life, so I'm lucky, or unlucky depending on how you look at it, that the local cemetery needed employees. At first, the old-timers who had been working there for 20 or 30 years just wondered why someone so young would ever want to be a gravedigger. It was hard work, really bad on the lower back, but I soon adjusted, and it turned out to be something more akin to a free gym membership than an actual job. I mean it. I got swole pretty fast. And if I'm honest, it only ever felt like work if the weather was bad or we had an actual funeral on site. Otherwise, it was just nice to be able to spend time outdoors. So the way our cemetery was set up was pretty simple. The majority of the grounds were just regular grave sites, all pretty much the same size and same price. But the northwest corner of the grounds was a private site that contained much larger plots. These were reserved for much wealthier families, and the local undertaker made a lot of cash from selling extravagant grave setups to them. I'm talking whole mausoleums, statues of angels, and stuff like that. We hardly ever visited that area of the site except for cleaning and maintenance duties, and those were never left to me. I didn't take it personally, but the older guys just didn't trust me with all the cleaning chemicals and whatnot that kept the marble and brass fixtures looking fresh, which is why it was so weird when I got a call one of my days off, asking me if I'd been up to that area recently. My boss was livid. I could hear it in his voice, and he pulled no punches when he asked me if I had been screwing around on the northwest plots. Of course, I told him no, that the last time I'd been up there was to watch one of the old-timers using the marble cleaning chemical as part of my training, and that had been months back. He sighed, seemed confused and confounded, so I asked him what exactly the issue was. He replied that it could wait until the next time I was at work. I was worried, sure, but I was pretty sure that I hadn't done anything wrong, not deliberately anyway, and especially nothing that involved the northwest plots. A couple of days later, when I rolled into work, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. I knew something fairly serious had happened. All I knew is that I wouldn't have to badger anyone to find out why. The boss man walked me out to the northwest plot, silent the whole way, and I knew better than to open my mouth until I found out exactly what was going on. There was already a worker up in the plot, tending to one of the graves, and that's when my boss told me that if I had been hanging around the area, maybe during my lunch break, eating a few snacks among the opulent grave sites, now would be the time to tell him. I swear to God that I hadn't, that I knew better than to eat stuff near the graves, as I'd been well informed it attracts wild animals that can in turn do damage to some of the resting places. And that's when he broke it down for me. Something had tried to dig up one of the freshly dug graves out in the northwest plots. He said something in particular, not someone, because we each had enough experience to recognize when a grave had been dug up by tools or by hand, or, in this case, by claw. It was rough around the edges, obvious claw marks in the dirt as opposed to the straight lines carved out by a shovel. This was something in an emergency, I mean, for obvious sanitary reasons, but for sentimental reasons too. If local families discovered that wild animals were trying to dig up their deceased relatives, there would be an uproar. Something had to be done, and quickly. A meeting was called among the gravediggers in attendance. As far as we knew, the mysterious digging had been taking place overnight, and was most likely undertaken by some kind of scavenger animal, a coyote, black bear, maybe even an escaped dog. The solution was obvious. Night watchmen would have to be present in the cemetery every night until the situation was resolved. And guess who was voluntold to be the night watchman for the first full week? You guessed it. The young guy. The new guy. Me. The only thing that made the proposal even vaguely attractive was the fact that anyone doing the night work would be paid double the regular rate, and I could definitely have done with the extra cash. First night of being on watch really sucked. All I had for company was a flask of strong coffee and a .22 pellet gun loaned to me by one of the other workers to take down any varmints. It was long, boring, and lonely, but once I adjusted my sleeping pattern, it got a little easier. Then, on the second to last night of my watchman duties, I was on a little foot patrol walking towards the northwest plot with a flashlight in my hand. And that's when I saw it. A flurry of frantic limbs digging at the earth. I could have shouted something, maybe even fired the .22 in the air to scare the animal away, but If I killed whatever critter was causing us so much trouble, I might be out of the extra pay, but at least I'd have my daytime life back. I crept up slowly, turning the flashlight off and sneaking stealthily towards the dark shape working away at the earth. I've hunted rabbits at night with my uncle before, so I figured I'd use the old flashlight technique to cause the animal to freeze for a second so I could take the killing shot. But when I did, when I aimed that powerful flashlight in the direction of the digging thing, I almost cried out in fear. It wasn't an animal at all. It was a human, crouched on all fours, digging away at the earth with his or her bare hands. I couldn't bring myself to aim the rifle. I was too shocked at what I was looking at. So all I did was start making as much noise as possible, telling them to get out of there, saying I'd call the cops if they didn't comply. They complied all right, but not out of fear. The look in that person's eyes was one of fury, pure anger that they'd been interrupted in their obscene little act. I swear if I hadn't had that rifle with me, if I hadn't the means to defend myself that were obvious to them, I honestly don't know if I'd be here today to tell this story. Needless to say, the other workers didn't believe me in what I saw. Some of them told me they didn't doubt that I'd seen something, that they disputed what that thing was, and I get that, I really do, but still, I don't know what I saw. The police struggled to determine anything other than maybe a few boot footprints, but it really didn't lead to anything else, as that individual ran far, far into the tree line beyond what I was capable of seeing. All I know is that it was definitely a person. Most people don't even believe me when I tell them, but I have a job where I work from home. People in my area mostly work with cars or in the medical industry. There aren't many jobs where I live. Thankfully, I was able to land a decent-paying job that let me work from my home office. It definitely comes with its struggles, but it is hands down the best job opportunity available to me right now. It isn't always perfect. It definitely comes with its pitfalls. Sometimes you have to sit at your computer even when there isn't any work to be done. It's also very easy to get distracted. But I think my biggest problem has to do with the house itself. It's kind of creepy. The house itself is an old Victorian, like really old. We're talking mid-1800s. A family friend owned the house and sold it to me for a very fair price, basically gave it to me. I was super excited because it meant I got a nice big house to live in by myself along with my girlfriend. I'm a natural loner and I don't really care for social interaction, so I had a nice big house all to myself and girlfriend and job where I work from home with very minimal social interaction with other people. That was basically my ideal life. But the house's age meant that it was going to be scary at times. And I don't mean with ghosts or anything like that, but sometimes I hear the house settling in or making noises that I can't explain. I've actually had quite a few instances where I'll be sitting down and doing some work and then out of nowhere, I hear a noise that I just can't rationalize. I go exploring throughout the house only to find that nothing has changed. It's as ominous as it is frustrating. I did just about what anyone else in the world would do. I started to use background noise to drown out the disturbances. First, I tried those quiet instrumentals on YouTube. You know, the ones that last 5 hours and they're supposed to put you at ease or something. It didn't really work for me because I couldn't get my computer to be loud enough to drown out all the noises. It was also not very good at keeping my attention. There was one week where my work was really slow and there wasn't a whole lot to do. I still had to sit at my computer though. There was an understanding that I was allowed to basically do anything I wanted as long as I was available to my coworkers if something came through that needed to be done. I didn't quite know what to do with this time and just started watching documentaries on YouTube. It was actually pretty fun. I learned a lot. And so that next week when things started picking up again, I just instinctively turned on a documentary. I wouldn't be able to have all of my focus on it, but it was a lot better than having some ambient noise. It actually helped distract me from the sounds of the house. I guess I just didn't have enough mental focused energy to notice any of the other sounds going on around me, if that makes any sense. Well, it had been about 2 weeks of me watching documentaries while I worked. Everything seemed to be good, until one Friday morning, I started work at 8 and this must have been around 10, I was sitting at my office chair working while I listened to a documentary about certain conspiracy theories when all of a sudden I heard an abrupt banging noise coming from upstairs. Like I had said, I hadn't been distracted by any noises for a while by this point, so the fact that I noticed this noise meant that it was probably serious. My fight or flight kicked in. You might laugh at me, but when I work, I keep a knife next to me. I ran upstairs with the knife and looked around for any suspicious noises. The banging had stopped, and I didn't know where it had come from. I knew what section of the house that I heard it from, but there didn't seem to be anything out of place. I stood there for a few moments, and then I heard it again. It happened right on the other side of my door. I immediately braced myself for there to be some kind of animal or something trying to get in. I didn't really know what to expect. I opened my door to see that the screen door had not been properly closed. My girlfriend didn't close it all the way when she left for work that morning. It was also pretty windy that day, so it was just going back and forth, causing a banging noise when the wind got bad. This was kind of a breaking point for me. I didn't want to live my life in constant paranoia and fear of some kind of attacker coming into my home. We live in a safe area. There's never been a serious threat. And I have run around my house with a knife way too many times now. I honestly felt kind of stupid, so I made a decision. I was no longer going to assume that someone was breaking in if and when I heard a sound. I put the knife in my dresser in my bedroom and decided that I was going to just be in to work while I was working, except for my documentary, of course. So there I was the next week. It happened on a Wednesday. I was sitting in my office doing exactly what I had set out to do. I was working, ignoring the noises and listening to a documentary. I remembered the exact part of the documentary I was on when I heard it. The sound was the loudest sound I had heard in the house up to that point. At first, I reassured myself that it was nothing and that I need to fight against this paranoia. The sound continued, and I couldn't take my mind off of it. After about 5 minutes of listening to what sounded like rummaging and walking, I went upstairs to check. Bear in mind, I didn't have any weapon on me, and I was expecting some kind of reasonable explanation. When I got to my kitchen, I saw that the front door was wide open. The cabinets were all open, and there was a strange man rummaging through my stuff. I didn't notice until after the fact, but he had been eating something. I remember screaming at him. I don't remember what I said, but it was something to the effect of, "What are you doing in my house?" obviously. Then he just ran off. Didn't say a single word. He took a loaf of bread with him, but I don't think he took anything else, other than what I had eaten before I came upstairs. I reasoned with myself that he must have been some sort of homeless man or something. I don't know why else he would steal a loaf of bread from a very ordinary-looking house. And this was the worst thing that could have happened. On some instinctual level, it had proved all of my worst fears right. There was some kind of danger in my house, and of course, it was the one time when I didn't have my knife on me. I lucked out that he didn't try to hurt me or anything, but it's still horrifying to see nonetheless. I just work at a local coffee shop now. It's honestly my only way to stay sane.